Star Trek Prodigy, Supernova. Chapter 10. Hologram Janeway rushed to the transporter pad. "Are you all right? I've been trying to contact you for hours." Dal brushed off her concern. "Totally fine, Janeway. I had everything under control."
"And Jankum Pog was totally under a rock,"
Jankum said, hopping off the pad and brushing the sand from his hair.
"Jankum Pog is going to get some ADB."
Gwyn watched as he sauntered out of the transport room into the corridor. Unbelievable, she thought, both of them. "Dal," Janeway continued, "what happened down there?" Gwyn sat on the steps, leading down from the pad. She was hungry and tired. It didn't matter that she was uncomfortable. None of that seemed to really matter now. "What happened is that we were all too late. They're all gone. The Watchers got them all." Janeway was shocked. "The Watchers?" Dal answered this time. "It's true, Janeway. Looks like it happened a while ago. There wasn't anyone around, but there were Watchers, hundreds of them, probably thousands." "Fascinating. That explains those unexplainable energy signatures Zero reported. At least some of them. How did they get there? Why?" Gwyn realized everyone was waiting for her to answer. She shrugged. Janeway didn't want to put any more pressure on the crew, so she moved on. "Well, all of that will have to wait. We have a much more pressing concern at the moment. I'll meet you on the bridge." Janeway disappeared, leaving Dal and Gwyn alone in the transporter room. Dal extended his hand to Gwyn. "Are you okay?" "No," she replied, letting him help her up. "And I have a feeling that things are only going to get worse."
"Things are going to get so much worse,"
shouted Jankum Pog as Gwyn and Dal arrived on the Protostar's bridge.
"Tell them about it with acronyms, Janeway. We don't have time for full words."
Janeway waited for Dal and Gwyn to approach the console she and Jankum Pog were looking at. "In this case, I think it's more important to be clear than quick, Jankum." "What's going on?" Dal asked. Janeway fixed her gaze on a display showing a collection of scientific readings. "Our scans seem to indicate that the Dyson sphere that's enveloping the Sunstar is failing at an alarming rate. Fissure eruptions are causing shock waves and extraordinary energy surges." "Was that what hit the ship earlier?" asked Dal. "No doubt about it. We were caught in the blast emanating from right here." Janeway pointed at the screen. The crew watched the computer simulation of how a massive blast of energy erupted from the Dyson sphere and hit the Protostar and the 3 orbiting planets. "We did sustain some damage from the shock wave. Nothing that can't be fixed manually, though. Aside from the few seconds it took to beam you 3 back on board, I've kept our shields raised to minimize any further damage." Dal nodded his head. "Could the blast have affected our comm badges too?" "Absolutely. It was strong and bright enough to push some of the ship's sensors and comms offline, so it makes sense to think it could do the same to your personal devices." She opened her holographic hand to reveal 2 new comm badges. "Once I realized I couldn't hail you, I assumed that to be the case. I took the liberty of replicating new ones for you." Gwyn and Dal accepted the new hardware. They affixed the iconic Starfleet symbol, reminiscent of an arrowhead, to their uniforms.
"Jankum Pog wants a new one too," the engineer thought. "Just because Jankum's comm badge started working again doesn't mean it's not all scratched up."
Dal was grateful for Janeway's ingenuity. "Thanks, Janeway. You really saved us all." "Not all, Dal," Janeway said, lowering her chin. "Not yet." Dal suddenly realized that Rock Talk, Zero, and Murph were not there. How could he not have noticed that the second he stepped onto the bridge? "Where?" "Even though we couldn't communicate, your comm badges emitted a strong enough signal for me to easily pinpoint where you 3 were on the first planet." She brushed that planet off the display. "Unfortunately, I'm unable to get many readings from the 2nd or 3rd planets. There are enormous amounts of covalent energy mooring the Dyson sphere to those planets, And though there's no active connection between the sun star and the planet you were just on, the protostar is showing a trace amount of energy. So we can only assume that all 3 planets were, at one time, tied to their sun star. That explains the dead battery we found, said Dal. Gwyn hoped that whoever built the machine, whoever the Watchers forced to build the machine, were successful in shutting it down before they were eradicated. Maybe. But even without a third active connection, there's enough energy coming off just those 2 tethers to keep our sensors from registering much of anything. But I've been scanning each planet for life forms, sector by sector. It's a slow process, but accurate. With a squeeze of her fingers, the image zoomed in onto 2 small pulsing dots, indicating 2 individual forms of life on the second planet. And I found 2 life signs here. Gwyn squinted at the display. But that's only 2. Where's the other? Janeway took a deep holographic breath. I don't know. Gwyn tried not to gasp. Janeway straightened her holographic back confidently. I don't know yet. As I said, it's taking longer than I'd like, but Starfleet never gives up. We just need patience. Dal's mind raced. How much time do we have, Janeway? Not much, she said, once again refocusing the stellar map onto the Dyson sphere. The explosions emanating from the fissures are increasing in frequency, duration, and intensity. Most have been occurring planet-side, or at least far enough away from us to not cause too much trouble. I've been able to maneuver the protostar to avoid the ones that have headed our way, and the shields are helping and holding. But everything indicates that we probably don't have much time until the entire sun star goes supernova. Meaning what? Asked Dal, trying to remember even a bit of the astrophysics he'd been studying. Meaning, said Janeway solemnly, that the sun star will explode, and if it does, when it does, everything in the system, including those 3 planets, and, if we're not out of here, us, will be destroyed. Oh, I should mention one more thing, said Janeway. One more thing? How much more could there be? Asked Dal. Our sensors are also showing an emerging wormhole near the sun star. It may or may not be related to anything, but at the rate it's growing, it looks like it will reach full size around the same time as the sun star goes supernova. Is that it? Are there any more things? Dal asked. Not that I know of, yet. Gwyn sat on the armrest of Dal's captain's seat. How much time exactly is not much time? Janeway ran a quick calculation and confirmed her results with several of the protostar systems. 40 hours, give or take. Give or take? Asked Dal. Well, all time is relative, but in this case... We need to get out of here, said Jankum. We need to find our friends, countered Gwyn. They looked at Dal to be the tiebreaker, to make a decision, to be the captain. Okay, Dal said. Here's the plan. Chapter 11. Jankum walked with Dal and Gwyn along one of the protostar's corridors until they arrived at an intersection. So just to make sure Jankum Pog understands, Jankum Pog is going to stay here on the protostar with Janeway. Jankum Pog will fix the damage while Janeway searches for the 3rd life sign. Right, said Dal. And you 2 are going to beam down to the planet. Right. The planet we know nothing about. Right. To see whether the 2 life signs Janeway found are 2 of our missing friends. And if it is them, you'll get them back here. Right. And if it's not them, we'll see if we can help. And if that planet's filled with Watchers too? Dal threw his shoulders back. I've got a plan. Okay. Jankum Pog understands. The engineer flexed his multi-mitt and turned left down the corridor on his way to make repairs. Jankum Pog is glad he's the one staying on the ship. Gwyn and Dal turned right towards the transporter room. Gwyn positioned herself on one of the teleporter pads. What is the plan, Dal? We'll figure it out. Janeway, energize. We can't just... Once again, Gwyn was interrupted by an unexpected dematerialization. Figure it out, Dal. Gwen continued as they rematerialized on the planet's surface. And if you think... Gwen interrupted herself this time. She looked around and marveled at the enormous and well-lit room they found themselves in. Each and every square inch of the walls, from the floor to the impossibly high ceiling, was stacked with neatly rolled scrolls. Tables and desks were placed throughout the hall. Dell's comm badge sprang to life. "Janeway to away team." "We've arrived safely, Janeway." "Acknowledged. But where are you?" "I'm in heaven," said Gwen, smiling for what seemed to be the first time since finding the doll on Odaru. Janeway was confused. "Where?" "We're not in heaven, Janeway," Dell corrected. "It's only a library." "A library?" Janeway's voice bounced. "I am fangirling with Gwen. I love libraries." Dal liked libraries too, but Gwen seemed to be in another dimension. "Gwen, if you can focus for a minute, maybe something in here is useful." Gwen walked over to one of the desks. A large open scroll and an overturned chair lay beside it. "Everything in the library is useful, Dal," she said, "but this may be especially useful. It's like someone was reading this and left in a hurry." Gwen scanned the hand-drawn symbols filling the scroll with her tricorder. "Sending you the text from one of these scrolls now, Janeway." "Received. Running it through the Universal Translator. This may take a few minutes." Dal righted the chair and took a seat. It was much less comfortable than his captain's chair. "Remember how your father banned Universal Translators on TARS?" Gwen nodded. "He always said prisoners who cannot communicate cannot rebel. How'd that work out for him?" Before Gwen could answer, Janeway's voice came through. "Interesting. According to the translation, it seems the inhabitants of this planet called themselves Neuroans. It says that this planet is called Mirios. You were just on Orisi, and the other planet in the system is called Teres." Gwen, still amazed to be in a library, said, "Imagine how much more knowledge is stored here." Dal was, for once, more practical in his query. "They can build a giant space generator around a sun star, but all their stuff is written on scrolls and painted on walls?" Janeway paused. "Perhaps there is something to be said for the simpler way of life, even if the Neuroans did have access to advanced technology." "Weird, but okay," said Dal. "What else can you tell us?" "Nothing more until you unroll and scan more of the scroll, I'm afraid." With that, Gwen approached the scroll and unfurled it slowly, being careful not to rip or damage it. Gwen jumped back and screamed. Her fretwork reflexively extended from her arm and pierced the scroll right through the table. Dal didn't know whether to rush to help Gwen or to the table's edge to keep the scroll from spooling off it. "What is it?" asked Janeway. "What's going on down there?" Gwen waved her hand, shooing Dal away from her. "We're doomed. That's not my father leading the Watchers." Dal slowly approached the scroll, the part still fretwork to the table. "That's Dreadnought." Chapter 12. Dal searched the scroll for more information. "That's it, Janeway. There's nothing written or left to translate after the drawings of Dreadnought in pieces and then being put together." Gwen still couldn't believe it. "And then he repaid these inhabitants by destroying their system. Why?" Janeway acknowledged Dal's transmission. "Gwen, did the Diviner have more than one Dreadnought lieutenant on Tarzomora?" "No," Gwen replied to the voice coming from the comm badge. "His was the only one, and that one bloodthirsty monster was one too many." Dal leaned in toward the scroll for a better look. "This must be a different Dreadnought." Gwen nodded. "And it looks like he conquered the Neuroans, all on his own." This had to have something to do with Solom, she thought. How could it not? Her father, the diviner, was a clever man. Maybe this was all part of his master plan? To get her to this planet too? Was she a part of this tragedy? Dal leaned in toward the scroll for a better look. "I'm no art expert, but this doesn't look exactly like your Dreadnought." Gwen flinched at being assigned sole ownership of that monster. Dal quickly realized how he'd accidentally hurt his friend. The Dreadnought. Dreadnought. Just Dreadnought. I mean, look at him. This one seems meaner than the other one. Gwen squinted her icy blue eyes for a better look. He does look meaner. I didn't think that was possible, but he definitely looks meaner. Dal was eager to seize on an opportunity to heal the wound he'd caused. Totally. He's mean with a weird head. He's just a big old meanie head. Yep, that's not Dreadnought. That's meanie head. Gwen smirked. Meanie head. Dal placed a comforting hand on Gwen's upper arm. The friends stood in silence until Janeway's voice cut in. I hate to interrupt, but I must remind you that the clock is still ticking. You have crewmates to find before the Sunstar goes supernova. Right, said Dal, resuming his role as captain. Where do we go, Janeway? The coordinates of the two life signs have not changed since I first detected them. We can only hope that they'll remain there until you reach them. Sending those coordinates to your tricorders now, but be careful. Dal checked his tech to confirm the signal was received. Okay, he said to Gwen. Let's go. Dal kept his head down, alternating between looking at his tricorder's directions and where his feet were falling. Gwen, on the other hand, kept her head up and fretwork out, just in case they came face to face with more watchers or worse, meanie head. But instead of danger, she found herself in constant awe of the library's architecture and contents. They passed through countless halls and corridors, each containing countless scrolls and artwork. Whoever the Neurones were, whatever happened to them, they were clearly people who valued education and history. It stung Gwen to think that she may have played a role or an unwitting part in their destruction. Dal stopped before an enormous set of doors. They'd come to the end of this part of their journey. The crewmates nodded to each other and opened the doors. Before them lay an abandoned city. Though the soaring and artful architecture of Mirio stood in stark contrast to the barren landscapes of Orisi, it presented more, not less, danger to the Protostar's crew. Watchers could be hiding anywhere. The crowded cityscape provided them with an incalculable number of places to hide and to ambush anyone passing through. And if Meanie Head was here to lead them, they could launch a calculated and coordinated attack at any moment. Dal and Gwen knew they had to be even more cautious and watchful of their surroundings. They could hear nothing but the wind blowing through the abandoned buildings and streets. Janeway to Dal. Dal tapped his comm badge to acknowledge. Dal here. Just checking in, Captain. We're fine? Still walking. How are things up there? Moving along. Jankum has been repairing the damage. I think he's dawdling a little with the food replicators, though. I'm getting reports of unusually high numbers of sweet radish pies being ordered. That sounds like Jankum. Well, he's been working hard all day. I guess he could use a break. Dal looked at Gwen. We all could. Take care of yourselves, Janeway continued. Make sure to stop for rest and for something to eat, but not for too long. We've got less than 40 hours until the Sunstar goes supernova, and you have at least another couple hours walking before you reach the location of the two life signs. I'm still working on getting our sensors fully back online, but we'll continue the regional scans for additional life signs. Janeway out. We should listen to the lady, said Dal, taking a seat on the bottom step of a staircase leading up to a building. Gwen sat on the step above. You know, I'm not telekinetic or telepathic or any other something, but I can tell when something's wrong. This isn't your fault. Gwen turned to him. You can't know that. Neither can you. How could you have done any of this? You were on Tars Lamora with me, remember? I remember all right. It's all I remember. So? Gwen stood and started to pace. So, sure, I was there on Tars with you. But if there were two Dreadnoughts, maybe there were two me's? There's so much I don't know. So much my father lied to me about. Hid from me. I can't really know anything for sure. You can know some things for sure. Gwen turned and stared at Dal. Like what? What could I know for sure? That I'm your friend, Dal offered. Gwen's face softened. She froze. Do you hear that? Dal cocked his head to one side. Sure enough, the telltale mechanical clicking of watchers started echoing through the cavernous, empty streets. It was too diffused to know where it was coming from, but it was surely coming. "We gotta go." Dal and Gwyn ran as fast as they could. "Janeway to Dal, your tricorders are registering elevated levels of adrenaline and a significant rise in heart rate. Is everything okay?" "Not now. We've got watchers on our tail." "I'm not picking up any energy signatures from your immediate area. Are you sure?" Dal and Gwyn stopped dead in their tracks. "You're not?" A familiar gruff voice took over the comm.
"Oh, did Janeway forget to mention that Jankum Pog got the protostar sensors back to 90%? Because Jankum Pog did."
"He did," agreed Janeway. "Once he finished eating, that is. The energy signatures that match the ones the Watchers emitted on Orissi are still a far distance away from you. In fact, they seem to be congregated in the direct vicinity of the two other energy signatures."
"Which means?"
asked Dal.
Gwyn remembered how the mindlessly and heartlessly programmed Watchers would function as either protectors or jailers on Tars Lamora. "Which means they're either defending those two life signs or jailing them there." Back on the protostar, Jankum looked to Janeway for guidance. She nodded.
"I'm sending the Watcher's energy signature to your tricorders."
Dal checked the readout.
"So all this time, we thought we were running from the Watchers when we were actually running toward them," Gwyn sighed as she looked at her own tricorder. "We were just so nervous to hear them that we imagined we did, just like we knew they were around any and every corner on Tars."
"Well, I knew they were around any corner on Tars, at least."
Dal was quick to correct her, too quick to stop himself from inflicting another injury on his friend. He knew nothing that happened on Tars was her fault, but there was a part of him, the scared, traumatized, still hurting part, that needed to remember that Gwyn was a witness to the diviner's cruelty. "That's not fair," she said, even though deep down she believed it to be true. I know. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking." Gwyn turned and started walking. "You never think." Dal silently agreed. "Janeway to Dal." "What's up, Janeway?" "Just checking in on your progress. It's been a few hours since you checked in. All's fine?" Dal looked to Gwyn to either agree or disagree, but she kept staring straight ahead. They'd walked in silence since their fight. Though they were able to rationalize not speaking to each other as an effort to keep audible tabs on any Watchers who left their post, the truth was that each was lost in his or her own memories and trying to think of ways to apologize to the other for things that had happened in the far and immediate past. It wasn't easy. None of this was easy. "Good. You should be coming up on your destination shortly. Be careful. Report back when you can. Janeway out." Dal's comm badge went silent. As they approached, the Watcher's chattering and chirping was loud and immediate. Now was the time for the crewmates to start taking calculated measures to avoid being detected by the Watcher's sensors or visual scans. Hiding behind statues, vehicles, and the other physical remnants of a now defunct but once thriving society, they slowly approached their destination. Dal and Gwyn peeked around a corner to see a battalion of Watchers scurrying in front of a building. The building was heavily fortified with walls too thick for their tricorders to penetrate, so they were forced to visually assess their situation. The building towered 6 stories above ground, and who knew how many below. Pieces of demolished Watchers littered both sides of the spiked gate that surrounded it. Gwyn wondered if there had been a skirmish or two here, and if so, who had been fighting the Watchers. So far, the Watchers seemed to have retained control of the building. Until now, Gwyn thought. I hope. "I know you well enough to know you don't have a plan," Gwyn whispered to her crewmate. Dal looked offended. "Well, as it so happens, I do have a plan." "Oh?" "Yep. We get past the Watchers, enter the building, rescue whoever's in there, find out what's going on, then get back to the protostar, out of this star system, and on to Starfleet." "That's the plan?" "That's the plan." "That's not a plan. That's a to-do list." "Oh, it's most definitely a plan," thought Dal. "And how do you plan on executing this plan?" asked Gwyn. "Please don't use the word execute," stammered Dal, suddenly distracted by the thought of winding up
on one of the gate spikes. That's it, he realized. We need a distraction. Dal's mind raced with possibilities, or the lack thereof. I got it, he said. Come with me. Gwen reluctantly followed Dal as they approached the gate. You know we're heading toward danger now, right? She asked. Don't be such a sourpuss, he said. Gwen was a master at translation and communication, but even experts couldn't know everything. What's a sourpuss? She asked. You, that's what. But you can't be a sourpuss if you follow my directions. Gwen was skeptical, but she didn't want to be a sourpuss, whatever that was, so she reluctantly listened to what Dal had to say. Keeping low to the ground, Gwen crept slowly closer and closer to the gate until she was in a fretwork's length of a downed watcher. Activating her neuroflux, she mentally extended the metal as far as she could, hooking it onto the watcher's carcass and dragging it toward her. Once the carcass was in hand, she held it to her body as she'd once held the Odorunian doll, and retreated to where Dal waited for her. Now what? She asked, handing him the deactivated killing machine. Now Jenkum takes over. Shh! They shushed the too loud voice coming from Dal's comm badge. Sorry, Jenkum got too excited. Dal carefully followed Jenkum's instructions on how to reactivate and control the Watcher's systems. This would be a lot easier with a visual, he thought. Or even if Jenkum was here to do it himself. Scratch that. It's probably best he's not. Jenkum had gained lots of first-hand knowledge of the Watcher's operating system while on TARS. He was often lucky enough to scavenge some of their spare parts for side projects, or to repair outdated and damaged mining equipment. But this was a first. He'd never reanimated one remotely before. It was oddly exciting. He instructed Dal on how to find the Watcher's main battery and how to power it up by connecting it to Dal's comm badge. The Watcher's red eye started to glow. Its legs slowly worked through the rust and dust, clogging its gears. Dal and Gwen looked at each other, hoping this would work. Dal set the deadly machine down on the ground, took a step back, and held his tricorder. He tapped a button, and the Watcher suddenly jumped and turned toward them and waited for instructions. It worked. The tricorder, linked to Dal's comm badge, now acted as a remote control. Dal tested the connectivity by instructing the machine to go left, then right, then charge up its stinger tail. Well done, Jenkum, Gwen said. Her comm badge came to life. Jenkum is a good engineer. Dal looked around for his own bit of praise. I helped too. Janeway's voice came through loud and clear. You're down to only one comm badge, so you'll have to stick together. Understood, said Gwen. But before we worry about separating, we have to worry about getting into the Citadel. On it, said Dal. The remote-controlled Watcher, now at Dal's command, turned toward his former compatriots. Don't go too fast, warned Gwen. This has to be a surprise attack. Dal scrunched his face in disbelief. Can you give me some credit? I know what I'm doing. The remote-controlled Watcher started walking at a casual pace, or at least as casual a pace as a mechanical killing machine could walk. Gwen relaxed just enough to then see the Watcher suddenly sprint into a group of 3 others. Hopping onto one and impaling it with its stinger tail, it spun quickly to grab and throw the second into the third Watcher, hurling them both offline and into a nearby wall. It hopped into the still sizzling duo and quickly ripped off 2 of their legs, using them as bayonets to stab, slash, and otherwise incapacitate the other Watchers it was taken by surprise. In less time than Gwen could process what was happening and tell Dal to stop, the entirety of the mechanical legion guarding the Citadel had been demolished. And that, said Dal, leaning against the wall casually, is how that's done. Dal reported back to the Protostar, making sure Janeway understood that his triumph was officially recorded into the ship's log as DVW Day, short for Dal's victory over the Watcher's Day. I'm proud of you, but let's hold off on assigning any honorifics until you and the rest of the crew are back safely on board, Captain, responded Janeway. Dal wasn't quite ready to release his Watcher from his control yet, so he kept it on a virtual leash, letting it walk 50 paces in front of them as he and Gwyn entered the building. Gwyn noticed Dal smirking just a bit. "Oh, how the tables have burned, huh? What? You being in control of a watcher instead of the other way around?" "Oh, you mean tables, how the tables have turned. Isn't that what I said?" "No, you said..." "Help! That's Rock's voice," cried Gwyn. Gwyn and Dal ran so fast they overtook their pet watcher. We're coming, they shouted down the abandoned corridors till they came to a giant metallic door. Pushing with all their might, they found an enormous generator, a twin of the dead one they'd found on Orissi, but this one was very much alive and throbbing with incalculable energy. Dal wiped the sweat from his forehead. Light, brighter than the protostar's warp drive, was contained within some sort of clear, solid barrier that directed it up and out of the power station into the sky above. "Dal! Gwyn!" Rock shouted. "My heroes!" "Friends," said Zero, who was stuck with Rock Talk in a cell too small for either of them to move. "It is a pleasure to lay my eye on you again. I almost lost hope." Dal approached his crewmates. "As a wise Medusan once said, while others give up hope, I cling to it." "Hey, I am a wise Medusan. You're quoting me." "You bet I am." Gwyn knelt just outside the glowing energy field and tested its strength with her fretwork. Sparks flew. "We have to shut the power down, Dal." "On it," he said, searching the walls for an off switch. "What happened, Rock?" asked Gwyn, not moving from her spot. She knew how scared her young friend must have been. "The transporter beamed me into this power station. At first it was cool because, it's science, but then the watchers locked me in." Gwyn tried to comfort her. "We'll get you out of here, don't worry. What about you, Z? After the transporter malfunction, I landed here, a fascinating planet, but a watcher patrol disrupted my investigations. It was quite rude of them, really." "A watcher?" screamed Rock, pointing to the idling remote-controlled mech. Unable to move more than just an inch, she pressed herself as far into the back wall as she could, pushing Zero ever so slightly toward the force field. Her metallic outer casing sizzled on contact with the energy. "Don't worry, Rock," said Dal. "This watcher is working for us." Rock Talk relaxed just enough for Zero to back away. They would have raised an eyebrow in disbelief had they had one. "A watcher working for us. That's a novel concept." Dal searched for a way to power down the energy field for the better part of an hour. He ventured out into the rest of the power station, the pet watcher leading the way, but couldn't find any other room that looked like a control center. He returned and searched for a button or lever to try on the console surrounding the generator. Lights flashed and screens provided readouts of energy fluctuations and readings that Dal couldn't understand. Hitting the wrong button or engaging the wrong sequence could be disastrous. He didn't want to accidentally kill his crew by initiating a power surge or a self-destruct sequence instead of saving them by powering it down. Dal looked up and watched as the green and yellow energy dissipated into an invisible version of itself and connected somehow, some way, high up above them to the Dyson sphere. Gwyn used the time to fill in Rock Talk and Zero on what had happened on the first planet and back on the protostar. This must be what it's like, she thought, in another life to tell a bedtime story. Hidden tunnels, unstoppable enemies stopped by Gwyn, Dal, and Jankum using their smarts and a little bit of luck, a giant citadel, and a daring rescue. All they needed now was a happy ending. Please let us have a happy ending. Once Zero and Rock were fully up to date, Gwyn turned to Dal. "Anything? Time's ticking." I know. Nothing." Rock Talk had been watching Dal and his remote-controlled watcher as intently as she'd been listening to Gwyn. "Those watchers sure are strong," she said. "What if instead of using it to hurt the other watchers, you try using it to hurt the generator?" "What do you mean?" asked Dal. "Well, if its casing is strong enough to go through another watcher, It's probably strong enough to go through the control panel and into the chamber to disrupt the matter-antimatter assembly, Rock theorized. And if this machine is anything like the protostar's warp core, even if we can't shut it down completely, we might at least be able to shove it offline long enough for us to roll out of here. Dal was, as usual, impressed by his young crewmate's engineering expertise. Once again, her brains were going to save them all. Let's try it. Dal directed the watcher to hop onto the generator's console. Thanks for your help, he whispered before ordering it to use its insect-like legs and tail to ravage into the control panel. The crewmates held their breath until, after a few moments, the lights from the generator and the force field began to flicker, and then they all went dark. Dal sighed in great relief as Zero exited the cell, their metal containment suit dented in the spots Rock Talk had been leaning on. Rock tumbled out and stretched to her full height. "Group hug!" she shouted, embracing Gwyn and Zero. "Not yet," said Gwyn, pulling away. "No group hugs until we find Murph." Rock's eyes went wide. "Murph's missing? We gotta find Murph!"